there is an effort in Washington, despite some of Donald Trump's anti-European rhetoric, there is an effort to coordinate these responses to Ukraine and to present a united front.
President Trump was angered this week by Russia launching the heaviest drone strikes on Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. He said that Vladimir Putin had gone absolutely crazy.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay?
He doesn't like it at all. Well, since then, the US, UK and other European countries have lifted all remaining restrictions on the range at which Kyiv can use the missiles they've been given, which means the Ukrainians will now be able to strike targets much deeper in Russia. Alistair, what's happened here? Has Donald Trump had some sort of epiphany about Vladimir Putin and suddenly decided he's not a nice guy? Or is this standard sort of, Trump rhetoric when he doesn't quite get what he wants?
I think it's probably a bit of a combination of the two. I think that Donald Trump is getting extremely frustrated by the ongoing war, by there's a degree of intransigence on the Russian part, not to essentially do what he wants. And I think he's using one of the sticks he's got in his arsenal at the moment, Donald Trump, the rhetorical going after Vladimir Putin, saying he's gone crazy, publicly I think probably expressing a lot of the frustration and anger that's communicated privately as well. Of course, the rhetoric can work both ways as well, and Vladimir Putin responded yesterday saying that some people are getting emotional about the situation. That was obvious reference there to the clip you showed from Trump. So I think Donald Trump is getting angry. Of course, he came into office saying that he'd solve the war in Ukraine. He put an end to it within 24 hours of winning the election. That's clearly not happened by some margin now. And I just think it reflects Donald Trump's growing frustration with the war, with Putin, and the inability by the West and the US in particular to find a solution to it.
Is it just irritation, or is there sort of a genuine concern in the White House that they've written all these checks they can't cash? Because I mean, when Trump said, when he was running for election, I'm going to end this war immediately, many people didn't quite believe that he was capable of doing that. Nonetheless, he said he was, and as his presidency kind of winds on, the fact that he hasn't, it starts to look like a bit of a weakness, a bit of a failure.
It's not a bit of a failure, it's a huge failure. You ally that to what's happening in the Middle East and his inability to broker a ceasefire there and get remaining hostages out of Gaza. And you wonder quite what Donald Trump's foreign policy victories are. He's talking to Iran about their nuclear weapons ambitions. And there are a lot of people, especially Israel, the US's biggest ally in the region, not really very happy about that at all, and fears that Donald Trump will end up allowing Tehran to effectively develop a bomb at some point in the future. So it's Ukraine in particular, but other foreign policy objectives. It's difficult at the moment to see where Trump's successes are in the whatever it is now 4 months since he came back into office.
And look, it's often said that he's about to get bored and just give up on trying to secure peace in Ukraine. But that would look even weaker. That's even more of a failure. Do you think that's likely?
Look, yes. I agree. I think it would look extremely weak, especially having invested so much political capital in Ukraine so far. He has options, right? We've seen the rhetorical option. Putin's going crazy. We've seen the military option, allowing now the Ukrainians to strike targets much deeper into Russia with some of the Western munitions that they've been given. There's economic pressure as well. There are still sanctions that can be brought to bear on the Russians. There are sanctions that can be brought to bear on Russian trading partners, those that still buy Russian energy, use the Russian banking system, which and energy in particular underpins the economy. So there are still weapons and tactics, if you like, at Donald Trump's disposal. And one of them is walking away. But you're right, there's a big political cost to that. And I think that would also anger allies in Europe. Donald Trump isn't getting on particularly well with Europe at the moment, but he does need some friends. I think just walking away from Ukraine would cause a lot of anger and upset in European capitals too.
Despite that much discussed breakdown of relationships with European allies, including us over here, of course, the fact that European countries only lifted range restrictions on the weapons they've given to Ukraine after this Trump outburst, and when America's doing the same thing, does that show that America's still really kind of calling the tune here?
I think it does show that, absolutely, but I also think that it shows a degree of coordination as well. Some European governments have been calling on these restrictions on the range at which Ukraine can use weapons to be withdrawn for quite some time. But I think there is an effort in Washington, despite some of Donald Trump's anti-European rhetoric, there is an effort to coordinate these responses to Ukraine and to present a united front. Of course, with Trump, everything's a little bit more unpredictable, and you can see perhaps cracks in that alliance from time to time.
Yeah, look, we talked a little bit earlier on the show about Germany's offer to host exiled students from Harvard University after Donald Trump said he would revoke permission for it to enroll international students at all. He's now threatened to take a further $3 billion of grant money away from Harvard. What's going on there? What's the latest in that row between Trump and Harvard?
Well, the very latest this morning is that the administration is also threatened to cancel federal contracts. I mean, they're not as valuable as some of the grants, but there's $100 million of sort of commercial exchanges that take place between the federal government and Harvard, and Donald Trump's threatening to cancel that as well. This row really goes back to last year and some of the pro-Palestinian protests that we saw at university campuses, and the weakness, as it was perceived by a lot of people around Donald Trump, on the part of universities to crack down on what they saw as naked anti-Semitism. Now, Harvard would say they've changed the personnel at the top of the university. They've introduced measures to crack down on anti-Semitism, and say that this is really an example of overreach by the government. The federal government wants more input in who comes to Harvard, the staff that it appoints, the courses it teaches, something that Harvard says is just completely unacceptable from its point of view.
Does Trump have a point about the anti-Semitism problem at Harvard?
I think he does. I think he has a point about anti-Semitism at universities across the US. I think Harvard is being made an example of because it's refused to accept some of these oversight provisions that other universities have. And we saw big demonstrations at Columbia University in New York. Rather than on, Columbia University has allowed a degree of oversight, and some of its grants that were threatened in the same way that Harvard's grants have been threatened have been confirmed and reinstated. Harvard, the richest, the oldest, perhaps the most prestigious university in the US, has decided to take on Donald Trump, and it's seeing the full force of that.
There are conspiracy theories doing the round that actually he's just cross because his son didn't get into Harvard. Presumably that's not true. But what is this? I mean, is this about something more than anti-Semitism? Is this really a sort of like a power struggle to be the American elite in some kind of way? This is a sort of huge existential thing, isn't it?
I think so. And I think that it's. I don't think Donald Trump likes elite institutions that he can't have control over. The government can't have control over. And that's why he's introduced this task force, which would have a huge amount of government interference, if you like. I think Harvard would see it, around the appointment of staff, which students come, an admissions policy, what's taught on university courses, not just in things like Middle Eastern studies, which of course is the focus, but in other areas as well. And I think it's part of a wider battle between what the universities see as their academic freedom, their right to debate and to discuss things that perhaps aren't always palatable, and the government wanting to have much more of a say on what happens at universities and much more of an oversight.
And is this just about elite institutions, or is there a general feeling across the university sector in the United States that they're in for a really rocky time?
Well, if you look at what some of the universities have done, I just use the example of Columbia. They've been threatened with the same thing, and have essentially said, well, look, we will accept this this oversight because they believe it's existential to them. Harvard, much better off, its endowment of $50-odd billion. It feels it can take on the government, and I do think it's going to eventually, like many of Trump's policies, head to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will decide whether the executive branch of the government has the right to interfere in academic institutions in the way it threatens to with Harvard.
Thank you very much indeed, Alistair Dawber. Alistair is, of course, the Washington correspondent of The Times and The Sunday Times. Always good to speak to you.